formally begin the session, a very good morning to all the enthusiastic people present here to participate in the first lecture of the Expert Lecture Series 2021, organized by the Department of English, Assam Don Bosco University, on the topic Understanding Family, Feminist and Queer Perspectives. The Department of English, Assam Don Bosco University, began its journey in the year 2013 with a first batch of PhD scholars. With the committed involvement of the faculty members, within a span of 8 years, the department has now grown to be, a family of around 300 members belonging to its undergraduate, postgraduate, and PhD programs. The department has been relentlessly serving its purpose, even during the testing times of the pandemic. As an effort to retain the enthusiasm of the faculty and the students, our department is presenting an expert lecture series with the aim to enrich the students with the expertise of distinguished academicians from across academic institutions and disciplines, and to create a platform for interdisciplinary dialogue. Dear participants, we present before you the first lecture of the series on the topic Understanding Family, Feminist and Queer Perspectives. Our invited expert for this lecture is Dr. Soumya Ray, Associate Professor, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Dr. Soumya Ray, an alumnus of Hyderabad Central University, has been teaching sociology in IIT Guwahati. Her areas of specialization and interest include gender violence and law, family studies, sex trafficking and sex work, and caste in urban spaces. The department is grateful to Dr. Ray for accepting our invitation in a short notice amid the pandemic scare and the crisis. I would now like to invite upon Dr. Saikat Banerjee, Head Department of English, to deliver a welcome speech and to formally begin the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pritham. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to see so many participants for this first lecture in our Expert Lecture Series 2021. The main aim and objective of this series is to, bring on this platform experts of the respective fields of various plethoras of the interdisciplinarity of English and the other subjects, so that they can share their valuable opinions and ideas on particular topics, and our students and participants of this lecture series, they get a direct benefit of their expertise, thereby creating an atmosphere of combined knowledge and academic development to all the participants out here. Our participants mainly are from graduate and postgraduate level, so I'm sure that this expert lecture series will be a great value addition to their existing gamut of knowledge. On behalf of Department of English, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Soumya. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being the first resource person of this expert lecture series of Assam Don Bosco University Department of English 2021. Without wasting much time, I would now hand over the platform to you for a very enriching and enlightening lecture. Over to you, Dr. Soumya. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Saikat and Dr. Pritham, for this generous introduction and for being the first speaker in your series, because with this, all the technical delay was because of me. I'm a very technically challenged person, and I speak about it in my BTech classes a lot. I teach in at an Institute of Technology, but most of the times I take help from my students and others for things. So this delay was completely from my part, and has nothing to do with the Don Bosco Department of English. So I apologize for all of that. And thank you for inviting me for the other first speaker in your lecture series. What I'm going to do is that, because now I've taken a lot of time of all of you, so I will try to kind of precisely speak about understanding family through feminist and queer perspectives within like 30-35 minutes, and we can take up in the more discussions and question answer sessions if there are any. So to begin with, I would like to say that understanding family has been carried on through sociology and feminist studies and other kinds of disciplines uh, for centuries now. In fact, I cannot even tell decades in terms of understanding a family. So, but in the 1970s, when functionalism was at its top, functionalist perspective as was at its peak, family became a very, very essential uh, basic unit to be understood in terms of sociology. So I would begin my presentation with a functionalist perspective because it is in reaction to this perspective, it's challenging to this perspective that feminist perspective also kind of evolved. And I will then go from functionalism, I'll go to feminist perspectives, and then I will go to queer perspective. And I would like to clarify that when I'm speaking of feminist perspectives or queer perspectives, I am not doing it chronologically, but I'm only bringing concepts, major concepts from these perspectives to understand family and to kind of unravel the ways in which it was not critically looked at before feminism and queer perspectives kind of studied it or looked at it. So I'm not actually going from liberal to Marxist to socialist to radical feminist and then going to queer perspectives and difference and kind of variations within them. But I'm bringing concepts from all of them to explain how to understand family as an institution, because this would require a course rather than 1 hour of a lecture to understand family through going through each of these perspectives. So there are certain concepts that, and I was told that I'll be giving lectures to 1 hour lecture to undergraduate and graduate students. So that is why also I have prepared this in a more of a class lecture format and not really a paper format in a like a academic paper format, but as a class lecture format. So I would like to begin with this notion of heteronormativity. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the term heteronormativity, but in case today, because understanding family has gone beyond feminist perspectives and queer perspectives have kind of enriched the understanding of family in many in a more in-depth manner and kind of helped even including all helped understand family in a better way. I would like to start with the concept of heteronormativity. Now, heteronormativity, in a simple term, I am sure you must be understanding it, is sees heterosexuality as the norm. Okay? Heterosexuality is the attraction or the norm that allows opposite sexes to kind of to come into relationships with each other, sexual, romantic relationship with each other, and form families, etc. So heteronormativity is the basis of a mainstream family understanding, and therefore we need to kind of interrogate this idea of how does heteronormativity as a structure or how does heteronormativity as a value kind of brings about uh, affects individuals within the family and society in general. So in a way, feminist and queer perspectives were looking at family not really as a very egalitarian structure as claimed by functionalist perspectives or by mainstream understanding. Commonsensical understanding is that family is a very egalitarian, supportive, harmonious, basic unit of society, and therefore needs to be preserved. Not rejecting these ideas, not completely saying that this is not supportive, not cooperative, not caring, not living. Feminist and queer perspectives are not really saying that family cannot be a space of support and love and caring and harmony. They are not saying that. What they are saying is that we have to look beyond these aspects of family, and therefore this idea, I will begin with will take from both the perspectives and begin with the idea of heteronormative, patriarchal, gendered family structures. Okay, and that is what we are going to discuss through this lecture. Okay. So having said that feminist debates on family and queer perspectives on family have gone beyond mainstream understanding, I would like to give a short introduction to what functionalism was talking about or is still continues to talk about in terms of family as an institution, because if you look around it and you're coming from various societies, various communities across the world, as I have been informed, and from various communities within India itself, the commonsensical understanding is that family needs to be preserved in this current form. And in many times when you are listening to different kinds of discourses, especially from in kind of commonsensical political discourses or familial discourses or legal discourses or cultural discourses, you will be always listening to this idea that family is one of the basic institution to protect our culture and identity, and we need to preserve it as it is. We also listen to the idea that with the advent of westernized ideas, media, and other kinds of cultural interference from outside, supposedly, family is breaking up, or women, or you must be listening to the idea that women's empowerment, feminism, etc., and queer movements, etc., breaking the sanctity of the family. In the context of India, very recently, one of the high courts has said that marriage is a very sanctimonious institution and can be allowed only within the and only within heterosexual couples, a man and a woman, and not open up for others. And this is one of the high courts in India which is talking about it. And there, so this perspective to begin with kind of has many concepts within it which talks about family. I'm going to emphasize on 3 or 4 points of functionalist family, because this is the core of the perspective, that feminist perspective will be kind of challenging it and kind of discuss, kind of resist these ideas to bring out the gendered aspects of family. Now, functionalism argues that every part of society affects each other. That means it argues that interconnectedness of all institutions is a must in any society, and each institution's function affects the others and maintains stability or brings conflict in a society. Therefore, functionalism is always kind of emphasizing on the idea of stability, harmony, cooperation, because they believe that each institution has to function according to the given norms and values and not deviate from it, so that as a whole the society can remain stable. Okay, and the growth and evolution of society happens through cooperation according to functionalism. Within that, functionalists believe that family is a basic unit, a basic institution of society, and it, through its various functions, family actually kind of contributes to the stability and harmony of a society. Now, functionalism argues that through its functional prerequisites, the society is family helps society maintain balance and maintain equilibrium. The 4 major functions that functionalism emphasizes of that family has are economic functions, sexual functions, reproductive functions, and socialization. Okay. Now, I don't have the time to get into each of it. I'm just assuming that as students of social sciences, you understand what are these functions, that family functions to protect and kind of reproduce and reproduce future citizens, future generations of human beings. It kind of contains sexual necessities of human beings, as well as socializes you to be a part of your culture, your community, your nation, and in general, larger human society. So functions within the family are very, very important for for functionalist perspective, because what they emphasize it, and these are small little words that they use, but they are very, very important for us to understand family within the feminist and queer perspectives, because functionalism says that functions within the family are and should be, and this should be is very, very important for our understanding, because it emphasizes that functions within family are and should be performed on the basis of sexual division of labor. And this should be and are as words may seem as very, very simple, normal, natural terms to be used in understanding family. But these are the this contains the politics of family. When functionalism is saying, and when I'm emphasizing on functionalism, I'm trying to emphasize on it because the larger understanding of family within any society is agreeing functions within this that we have to understand things. So when functionalism is saying that functions within family are and should be performed within the basis of sexual division of labor, what they are emphasizing is that women and men are biologically predisposed for roles of caretakers and providers respectively. That means that there is the gender division of labor or the sexual division of labor as is called by functionalism, that women are by birth feminine in nature, loving in nature, caring in nature, and are biologically, the biology makes them predisposed to be caretakers within the family. Their biology makes them predisposed to be within the private and not go out to the public market economy. Whereas men are biologically predisposed to be kind of providers because they are stronger, they are less emotional, they are more rational. Okay, these are the things that kind of gets inbuilt in an understanding where sexual division of labor is made to look natural. So when you are looking at common sense understanding of family or functionalist perspective as such, one is kind of accepting the notion that men and women are biologically defined. Nature defines them, their biology defines them, and they cannot perform and should not perform beyond these kind of supposedly naturally assigned roles of caretaker and provider. And it is in this that feminist perspective would kind of interrogate this idea, one of the ideas, and kind of talk about how to understand family beyond these myths of biological predisposition of functioning within the family. That's one of the first point. The second point is that functionalism is saying that this kind of biological performances, this kind of caretaking and provider roles, this kind of gender division of labor, okay, whereby the men will perform certain things and women will perform certain things, and they should not encroach on each other's functioning, is made. Functionalism is arguing is that this happens with cooperation of each of the member, voluntary cooperation of each of the member. That means functionalism is saying that within the family, men and women perform their roles, the gender roles, with cooperation, voluntary cooperation, mutually satisfaction, and this kind of function is beneficial for all. That means functionalism is arguing that there is nothing to question within these kind of gender roles. There is nothing to question with other familial roles that are provided, which is supposedly natural, because it is arguing that men and women perform these roles happily, voluntarily, get mutual satisfaction out of it, and benefit out of it equally. They assume that women agree to perform housework, caretaking work, and remain confined to the private, that is the household, and also to the differential access that this kind of confinement to private brings in. To explain further, gender division of labor keeps women at home, makes them caretaker and caregiver, and they do not have access to jobs and employment and kind of market economy as such. This kind of produces a lot of inequality in terms of economic capital, social capital, cultural capital that women and men kind of accumulate in their lifetime. Okay, I don't have time to go into it. I just want to say that this kind of argument that gender division of labor is good, gender roles are good, and everybody within the family accepts this kind of roles happily, voluntarily, and are mutually benefited by it equally, is something that is what feminist perspective will challenge. This is the number 2 point. Point number 2. So in that sense, if you look at what feminists challenge, these visions of family as a harmonious, sanctimonious, cooperative, mutually benefited institution. They argued that rather than mutually benefiting every member of men and women and all members of within the family, family actually perpetuates with the exploitation of the labor of women. Okay, and they argue that family generally functions within gender role socialization, and gender role socialization kind of makes women and men believe that what they are doing is with their consent. So in a way, gender socialization, gender division of labor, maybe in the question answer session, I can go into what is gender socialization, what is gender division of labor, etc. Because I don't have time right now. Just to make you understand, gender socialization is the process through which you learn to be male or female. You are not born as male or female. You are not born as men or women, but you learn to be men and women. You are born as a male or a female, but you become man and woman by gender role socialization, where you are said that you as a girl you cannot be you cannot be stronger, as a boy you cannot be weak, as a girl you should be liking dolls and not liking footballs, as a man you will be liking not liking cooking, you will be liking to play outside or go do hard works, go outside the house and do kind of work in the field or agriculture or the market economy. You should not be crying. All this is about gender socialization, and I can get into it in the question answer session. So the point I'm trying to make is that feminists argue that gender division of labor keeps women away from market economy, keeps women away from realizing their full potential, and therefore they kind of uh, accept a subordinate position within the family, because due to gender role socialization, due to gender division of labor, due to the public-private divide that is created, whereby women should be within the private and men can access the public as well as the private. In all of this socialization of masculinity and femininity, of caregiving and provider, of strong and weak, within these gender role socialization and gender division of labor lies a very, very important political economic effect. The political economy of family is based on gender division of labor, whereby the access to resources such as economy, such as education, property, social capitals, cultural capitals, political capitals, all of these remain confined to one gender as compared to the other gender. That is, in a system of patriarchy, whereby men have more power than women, okay, and are limited to the private sphere and not allowed access to resources for their full growth potential of their growth, a full potential to grow to their full potential. What happens is that at the end of it, you see that the women land up economically largely being dependent on men, and have negligible access to market economy and other kinds of capital accumulation, and therefore this dependence makes them accept a subordinate position. Now you can ask me that things are changed, and maybe I'll go get into it in the question answer session. But I would like to emphasize that, or feminist theories would like to emphasize that this dependence is supported by other kinds of institutions. It's not just family. Within the public and private divide, it is believed that and many times you will listen to this argument that why should law interfere in family? Family is a private space, okay? Why should we have a law on domestic violence, on child sexual abuse, or for that matter, today marital rape, okay? Or why should law interfere so much? Because families should be kept out of law. But if you look at the history of law and history of family, law has always been present within the family. Because you have law about who can adopt, who cannot adopt. You have law about who can go for jobs and who cannot go for jobs. You have law about who can marry who cannot marry whom. You also have law about who can own property and who to whom can property not be transferred within the family. So historically, law has always been present within family. So this argument, so going back to what I was trying to say, that the familial ideology, feminists question this familial ideology that of gender division of labor, of gender socialization, of gender roles, which created economic dependence for women on men, and therefore their dependence in all spheres of life. Okay. But interestingly, they also pointed out that other institutions which are seen as egalitarian, which are seen as the kind of just and delivering of justice, like law, like religion, like education, like politics, all of these institutions intersected with each other to confirm and reinforce gender division of labor, gender role socialization, and making women subordinate and occupy a secondary status within family. For example, in India, we had law on dowry in 1984 and before that also the protection of dowry against violence, protection against dowry violence. But it was only in 2005 that we had, or in 2008 actually it got implemented. We had the first law against domestic violence in as such. Or for that matter, in India, we did not have laws on sexual assault as such, except Section 354, which took a minuscule of sexual violence into account and not so much that used to happen within family and outside of it. We had the first law on sexual violence, a very comprehensive law, only in 2013 after the Nirbhaya case happened. So these are just example I can give, and we still don't have a law on marital rape and many other aspects. And there are different personal laws and customary laws and other kinds of laws that also continue to affect women's lives within family. So what I'm trying to emphasize through feminist understanding is that it is not just the familial ideology that kind of subordinates women, but other institutions and ideologies of other institutions intersects with familial ideology. Or in a way, because we are discussing family here, I would like to emphasize that why do we need to understand and interrogate family? We need to understand and interrogate family because familial ideology has a huge influence on law, politics, and education, which goes on in many, many different ways to mar women's lives, to kind of affect their lives and keep them subordinated within family and as well as within the society. Now one can ask that why do women have to obey all these things? Why can't women kind of resist all these things and all? It is not that women are not resisting it, or not that men and women are not resisting this kind of familial ideologies and gendered ideologies. A lot of movements have happened and other kinds of groups, all kinds of subaltern groups contributing to each other in terms of movements against resistance, against patriarchy, against power, against others. So there are a lot of movements happening and so many changes have also happened. But one of the things that one has to understand within family is control over women's sexuality. All your laws and your norms and values will always talk about good women and bad women, about talk about chastity of women and other kinds, virginity of women, and in marriage as an institution is an exchange of a virgin woman from one man to another man. You look at any kind of religions, all of these religions, you look at your Kanyadan, you look at, and we may think that these are all rituals, why do we have to give importance? But these are ideological reinforcement of familial ideologies. So in a way, control over women's sexuality is another thing that feminists emphasize to understand family, and the insistence upon having legitimate offsprings to transfer property is one of the fundamental points of political economy of family. The need for property to be transferred from one legitimate owner in the pure bloodline to another legitimate owner is a fundamental thing of familial ideology. And this need puts the burden on women to keep their sexualities under control, to remain chaste, to remain virgin, to kind of reproduce or have and explore their sexuality within the familial ideology, within the familial structure, within the marital structures. And therefore, women's sexuality is controlled either through ideologies, socialization, cultural norms and values. But when women question this kind of values and kind of want to break free out of it, violence against women in different forms exist within the familial structures, exist within the social structures, legal structures, which can be legitimately applied to women and supposedly justifiably applied to women to keep them in control and their sexualities uncontrolled, so that familial ideologies, familial purity of bloodline is not broken. I'll come to it when in question answer session more. So this is another aspect of another aspect that feminist perspectives spoke about, especially radical feminism, kind of, went beyond liberal feminists would emphasize equal access to resources for men and women to kind of for women to kind of grow and become equal within family and society. But radical feminism will emphasize that it is not just equal access to resources, jobs, education, etc., but one has to question the very roots of patriarchy, which lies in sexual exploitation and not just economic exploitation of women. They would argue that both sexual and economic exploitation go hand in hand, and we have to question both of it simultaneously to understand women's status within family. There is so much more to feminist perspective, but as we don't have much time, I'm just giving a framework to it. And I will now go to queer perspectives, and I will just give a short introduction to queer perspective and a short framework to queer perspective, and then maybe we can take up more in the question answer session. Do I have 5-10 minutes?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. So one of the most interesting challenges to feminist perspective comes from queer perspectives. Queer perspectives, queer movements, queer groups, intellectuals and studies, writings can kind of challenge feminist perspectives and kind of interrogated feminist perspective, showing them that how they have neglected other members of family and only looked at, concentrated on women's lives in general, rather than going beyond women's lives and looking at queer members of the family. Most of you must have heard of LGBTQA plus communities: lesbian, gay, bisexual, homosexual, transgender, asexual members who are integral part of family and society, but have, due to gendered patriarchy and heteronormative structures, familial structures, they have been made invisible in many ways and kind of suffer double or triple burdens as compared to women in general. And I am not getting into the idea of intersectionality, but intersectionalities matter so much. So one cannot just talk about women or men or queer members, but kind of have to think through intersections, which I don't have time to get into right now. But queer perspective would bring in the idea of heteronormativity and say that feminist perspectives took for granted that family is about men and women, and it is women who suffer within the family and are exploited. They completely neglected presence of other members, whose sexualities do not conform to the heterosexual norms. Feminist perspective, leaving aside some of the feminist feminists such as some radical feminists, lesbian feminists, and others. Other than that, feminism largely concentrated on heterosexual male-female relationships within family, assumed that that is the norm and that is the standard and that is the natural normal of family, and did not speak of other members who did not conform to heterosexual normativity. So what queer perspective argues is that to actually interrogate, to actually understand family and the effect that familial ideologies have on different members of family and society, and how it affects life chances and opportunities of different members of society, one has to interrogate the roots of marriage and family, and not just talk about economic and sexual exploitation, but talk about heteronormative structures, which is inherent to all families. Heterosexuality as a norm has to be questioned, and different relationships, different forms of family needs to be given space for, and not just man, woman, and children families, or not just marital families. Because when it comes to queer lives, when it comes to queer relationships, their relationships are seen as illegitimate, unnatural. They are not even given space to grow within a family many times, or when they are given a space to grow within the family as male or female, but the sexualities are discovered, then they are again discriminated against, etc. So in a way, I'm taking from an author called Rin Jin, who has written this very interesting paper. If any of you are interested to read it, it's in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly. I really like this paper and I gave it to my students. It kind of summarizes queer perspectives in many ways. One of the things that Rin Jin writes is, I'm to quote Rin Jin, she writes that while we mistrust what we do not understand, okay, there is little interrogation of what we trust. And this, I think this kind of summarizes queer perspective or interrogating family in many, many ways. When Rin Jin is saying that while we mistrust what we do not understand, that means there is so much of curiosity, anger, distrust, violence against a way of life that doesn't fall within the standard norms of family and sexuality. For example, homosexual relationships, transgender lives, single men and women, relationships outside marriage, persons not wanting to bear children but to adopt or not have children at all, friends staying together, siblings staying together who are not married after an age. These are things that we mistrust a lot in terms of our familial ideologies. We think they are anomalies, they are unnatural, their sexualities need to be corrected, and they are sent into psychiatric detentions, they are violated against, they are legally kind of punished, etc. So this is what Rin Jin is saying, that while we mistrust what we do not understand, there is little interrogation of what we trust. That means heteronormative families, man, woman, and children families, heterosexual relationships, relationships within marriage, however bad and violent these relationships are, the society will keep telling, law will keep telling that, we should adjust, we should save the family. This kind of things are normal within family. However violent, we want to save the family. So in a way, queer perspective is saying that you are looking at family in a heterosexual framework, but we who lie outside this heterosexual framework as are branded as anomalies, unnatural, and therefore we are kind of doubly, we are thrown away from families. We are kind of never given access to education, employment, etc., legally as well as within familial ideologies, and we never get the potential to grow and become equal members of the family and society. And this needs to be interrogated. So to kind of summarize queer perspective, I would like to say bring again from Rin Jin and other queer theorists. What is their argument? They are not saying that heterosexual relationships should not be allowed to stay. They are arguing that heterosexual relationships or heterosexual families, heterosexual marriages can be one form among the various forms of that families can exist in. We should create a society where heterosexuality is relegated to be one form and not the standard form. Only by allowing space for different kinds of relationships, both sexual or otherwise, familial, the standard family and otherwise, can we actually provide opportunities, resources, which will help members of society grow into their full potential and bring in a more egalitarian, more familial structures, and as well as societal structures. So in order to understand family, in order to understand the upheavals that we go through within the family, we not only have to look at family as a very supportive, loving, caring structure, which is a necessity, but the same love, support, harmony, caring can happen outside heterosexual familial structures, outside heterosexual marriage and familial relationships, and that is what feminist and queer perspectives are working towards. Of course, patriarchal gender structures need to be dismantled, interrogated, and annihilated, though no one is still emphasizing that they're not talking about annihilating heterosexuality, but patriarchy and gender structures. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Soumya, for such an enriching lecture. I'm sure the participants today will have few of the concepts, few of the understanding of of gender, family, and queer cleared out through this lecture. Of course, this lecture will be put on our official YouTube channel as well, so that the participants, they thoroughly benefit from an outline of gender, family, their relationship, heterosexuality, as well as an outline of the queer theory. If you permit me, I will put forward a few of the questions put forward by the participants here. The first question is, do contemporary families constrain a woman's freedom? And the next extension of that question is, how much public structuring of private choices is permissible to foster gender justice?
Can I answer question by question? Then I'll remember them.
Yes.
The first question is, do contemporary families
Constrain a woman's freedom.
Yes, they do. I mean, contemporary family is not one kind, right? Contemporary families are various kinds. You know, you get you have families where women are not allowed education. You have families where, you know, given the fact that we have high rate of female feticide and infanticide in India, especially. Okay, and the sex ratio is not up to what we should be having. You have families, contemporary families begin with those kind of families, two families where women do not have access to education or have access to education and not employment, etc. Violence is high. You know, you just look at NCRB data to understand how much violence exists, and these are reported violence, okay, and so much goes unreported. So in many ways, contemporary is not homogeneous. Contemporary is heterogeneous, and there are many different kinds of families that exist within the contemporary families. And within that, yes, contemporary families definitely in many ways constrain women's rights and women's access to so many things. But it's not just about women, right? It is also about homosexual, transgender, and other kind of way. I always ask my students in the class, how many of you have grown up in your schools and colleges and playgrounds with transgender children playing with you? With transgender students sitting beside you and being friends with you, or in your messes in IITs? How many of you see homosexual students proclaiming themselves to be homosexuals, or transgender students sitting beside you? And and how many women exist within IIT as such? Okay? So yes, in short, contemporary families do constrain women and queer rights, and do affect them in many ways and constrain them in many ways. And even those who are working women, supposedly working women, are more empowered. If I had time, I would have spoken about Second Shift. There's this book called Second Shift by Arlie Hochschild, who brought forth how women go out to work but come back in supposedly contemporary modern families to again play their gender roles, whereas men can come back largely, take a cup of tea, watch TV, you just have to see there's a short video called Juice, Saif Ali Chaya and others. Whoever is interested, please type Juice, Saif Ali Chaya. You will understand what Second Shift is, and you will understand how gender role matters a lot, even in contemporary families, where women employed come back and do exactly the same work, whereas men don't have to take those gender roles burden. And that itself forms a big constraint in terms of their performance, in terms of their creativity, in terms of productions, etc., and in many different ways. So yes, contemporary families do constrain women and queer groups. The second question is, how much
public structuring of private choices is permissible to foster gender justice?
I mean, I can take it as a very philosophical question also in many ways, but yeah, let me just tell you in these terms that I think every legal system and every state and society should understand that it is their duty to make each member of the society equal and to grow to the full potential. It's not the burden of the individual themselves. So as long as, and every legal system and state and society should understand that the permissions or the interference doesn't have to be from the angle of the perspective of the dominant groups, but from the perspective of from the marginalized. The standpoint of the marginalized should be the basis on which we should decide what is permitted and not permitted. So if women and queer groups and caste groups are saying that, we are not getting equal rights and we are not given resources and space to grow to our full potential, then their limits should be our limit. And that's how permissible we should be and open we should be for interference within the private. And if there is a private and public. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, how does hegemonic masculinity emanate differently on the societal level and on an individual or private level, such as within the bounds of matrimony?
Okay. See, I did not get time to get into masculinity and femininity. It's a very interesting question in a way because, hegemonic masculinity kind of brings out itself both in whatever is a private and within familial spaces as well as in societal spaces. But of course, because patriarchy puts burden on men also to be a certain kind of man as a standard of masculinity. So what happens is that in the societal spaces, in the so-called public spaces, this kind of unravels itself in a much more in a way, men kind of try to show their masculinity in a societal space. And this societal is not just the public space, but within the space of family also, whereby when their larger family is present, they try to assert their masculinity in much more stronger way, rather than when they are, and especially, if you look at new studies and when you speak to our generation or the new generation of men and women who are getting into families, you would see that, they would kind of understand that masculinity is putting a pressure on them and kind of open up to interrogating their masculinity and kind of emphasize on it lesser within the little private spaces of husband, wife, and children in many ways than compared to that of the public spaces. In public spaces, they have to stand up to the ideal because men also have the pressure of being masculine, and they are also violated and kind of chided, violated, looked down upon if they are not showing standard masculine behaviors. So in a way, one cannot say that, all men do in same ways. Largely, men also show hegemonic masculinity within families also. But yes, things are definitely changing. And in larger spaces of public, whether there's a public gaze, be that of your parents or your larger community or your society or your colleagues or your peer groups, men definitely want to perform more hegemonic masculinity performances rather than in their own private spaces sometimes.
Thank you for the answer. We take the last question of the day. In which way we can save women from the implanted trap by patriarchy, and how to free them from all these constraints?
Yeah, this is a question that all students would ask. You are saying about all this, how do we contribute? See, there are many movements happening. It is not a matter of a day or so, because if you listen to my lecture carefully or you read feminist studies and queer studies carefully, it's about socialization. It's about indoctrination, right? I always tell my students that you have to begin with yourself. How much of our privileges, it's all about privileges and underprivileged, right? We as women and men, what privileges we gain from it, and especially people who have privileges within patriarchy. We have to question privileges. We have to question gender socialization. We have to question gendered ideology, familial ideology. And that is not just for women, but also queer groups. And that is exactly why I started my lecture through heteronormativity. When you question heteronormativity, you automatically dismantle gender division of labor. Because only when men and women can marry and have familial system can gender division of labor sustain. That is exactly why our political leaders, religious leaders, social leaders are so scared of queer movements, so scared of the fact that, even our high courts and courts are scared of queer movements and queer rights, because the movement, men marry, or women and women marry, where does gender division of labor stay anymore? So I have no one answer, neither do feminists have one answer, or queer movements have one answer to how to bring empowerment to women. There is education, there is law, there is politics, there are so many things. But I think to begin with, we have to question privileges, we have to question heteronormativity, we have to question gender socialization in our own ways, and begin with ourselves, and then move on to the larger structures.
Well, with that, we come to the end of a very enriching and informative lecture, as well as a very engaging question answer session. Words are not enough to thank you for such an enriching session. May I now request my colleague, Ms. Sagarika Kutuki, to please give the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for the first lecture under the Expert Lecture Series 2021, organized by the Department of English, Assam Don Bosco University. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to our honorable speaker, Professor Soumya Ray, for accepting our invitation within a short notice and then enlightening us with her speech on understanding family from feminist and queer perspectives. I would also like to thank ma'am for taking up the questions and answering them so effectively. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Reverend Father Stephen Marvelly, for his constant encouragement and support to the department. My sincere thanks to our Honorable Director, Dr. Rizu Sharma, Director, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, for being there with us for any kind of endeavor that we take up, for her constant help and support and guidance. I would also like to thank Dr. Saikat Banerjee, Head, Department of English, Assam Don Bosco University, without whose help and support this event would not have been possible. And thank you so much, sir, for your constant help, motivation, support. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants present here for their active participation in making this lecture a very successful one. Once again, thank you everyone. Stay safe. Thank you.